Okay, we're in now.
And I think so the market overall is down about 15.32% this year, which I would say still reflects that whole weak sentiment across EM market. So we're discussing with a foreign investor yesterday, which we're hosting, and his own view was that he doesn't think the outlook changes over the next 12 months. And I think he's a frontier fund manager, invests in Africa and a few Southeast Asian countries, and his view is that, so even though it's more an EM pressure, but the reality is that the frontier guys can't escape it as well. So in a way, his position is that, so currently everything is cheap, but there's that view that things could get cheaper as well. So
yes,
I suppose that's why you're seeing that weak behavior, because everyone thinks the market could fall.
It could fall some more. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for that. Let's delve into our first story for the day, right? It's a little bit breaking news here.
Continue to ask is more compliance and how you try to push compliance, because if you think about VIDs, not sure where that is right now, and I think there was also a lot of noise around that. And
yes, I mean, they did claim a certain level of success, that a lot of people did come forward voluntarily. But I guess the question in people's minds right now is to what extent does that declaration come in? Does it go into, like you said, offshore investments, maybe not just property, but bonds if you're in the stock market, if you've got savings in another country? How does that affect people who do this?
I suppose it affects overall, right? So I think compared to a few other markets like South Africa, Nigeria, there's almost no restriction to how you can externalize your investment. So in South Africa, there's a fixed amount, and once you go past that limit, you can't take money offshore as an individual. In Nigeria, as long as you have access to the formal market, you can always externalize your fund. So I think for the federal government, it's also a way of trying to ensure that people pay the right taxes on investments, and so I think it's clearly positive, but I think my own question is still more implementation. You'd argue that we're close to election cycle right now. It's difficult to see how that is in the front burner. Everyone is more or less thinking about the elections. I suppose for VIDs as well, that's why we're not seeing such a strong compliance. So I suppose it's also a function of what happens with this administration. So who knows where we'll be over the next 12 months, and if we'll still be pushing this new
knows indeed. Do send in your comments to us. Don't forget, we're streaming live on YouTube as well, so if you want to go up to youtube.com/smooth981fm Lagos, you'll see our smiling faces up there. We've already got a message in. Ni is first in with this one, asking, listen, does that mean double taxation? Will they stop paying tax on the assets in the country where the assets are being held? Interesting question.
Yeah.
Food for thought there. Wagwenga Kamu says, how does the president expect Nigerians with assets overseas to pay taxes on them? But if you live abroad in Kwa, are you going to pay taxes as well? It's the politicians who mostly have such assets. So the president is simply going after his own people, Abi.
Yeah, I think it's really more for residents. So if you're non-resident, I don't expect that you'd have to pay taxes. But I think it's still how government is able to track that. I suppose that's why it's voluntary. Because for now, I'm not sure how much data they'll have to be able to track that. And so you still need to engage with foreign countries to see what holdings they have, engage with foreign banks as well. And I think that makes it a bit more complicated. So in a way, if you have a few individuals you're targeting, that might be easier. Because I suppose with VIDs, that seems to have been their approach, in the sense that the focus was to go to board members of publicly listed companies.
Yes, on a certain bracket.
Yes, and so those letters was expected to scare them to comply.
Thank you very much for that. Let's move on now to our next story, which would have been our first. Fuel subsidy discussions are continuing. What are your thoughts on, there's a headline from BusinessDay on the federal government losing 29% of its October earnings to subsidy payments.
So it's clearly a staggering figure, and I think it's a function of where the oil price is, landing cost of petrol, and what the pump price. And I think maybe what makes it a bit more confusing is that, unlike in the past where there was a figure to subsidy, the way the way NMPC treats it right now, you're not sure of the exact number, and so I think for some it's more just trying to figure out how we deal with that subsidy issue and make sure we're efficiently using our funds, because if we're losing 29% to petrol subsidies, and if you think about how much that could go to infrastructure development and so on, and
or just people development.
yes, yeah, that's what I was thinking as well.
It should be
All the
nice,
social
because
security.
because I mean we've spoken a lot about infrastructural development, but well, I guess it'll be interesting to see how this sort of develops, I guess.
It will, and I think it's more also that question around dealing with deregulation of the petrol price as well, and the petrol sector, which some might link to the petroleum industry bill and so on, and I think it's how government decides to take a firm position, because there's been the argument this year as well that as long as you're close to elections, it's difficult to see how people make such challenging and non-popular decisions.
And even whether or not we're close to election, I mean, it's the reason why it's been such a hard decision to make over the years, to completely deregulate. It's a tough decision, and no government wants to be burdened with
obviously
responsibility.
Yes, it does. And I think the bigger question as well is, once the Dangote refinery comes on stream, it doesn't change that question as well, in the sense that ultimately he'll still want to make economic profit, and it's still a function of what global prices are, and so we'll still have to make a decision, because if selling in Nigeria is a loss, then he's better off exporting than keeping it in the country.
Indeed. So as we continue discussions on fuel subsidy, something else that's repetitive in the news is the discussion on minimum wage. Back and forth and back again. We got an update yesterday, and we are going to be talking about it as well during Freshly Pressed later on, that no agreement has been reached. What is being reported, according to the Premium Times, and a big up to them for their investigative reporting, is that the federal government has proposed 24,000 as a minimum wage. The states are proposing 20,000. The NLC wants 30,000. I mean, at least it's a step down from the 50-something thousand we were hearing rumors a few months ago. But what are your thoughts on this, and whether any consensus is going to be reached before the end of this year?
So I think it'll be consensus reached. It's more implementation. So it's clear that implementation this year is unlikely, and I think it's also positive to see that everyone acknowledges that necessity to increase wages. Well, but if you look at what the state governments are proposing, it's almost like saying we don't want to move that figure. And I suppose for them, it's because a number of them are still operating with the old minimum wage. So
and still owing several salaries.
Yeah, I think that's the question as well. So if you look at some numbers out there, it's quite staggering what a few states owe, either with salaries or pensions and so on. So I think that there's always that question of execution. But I think there's the reality that if you think about where prices of food and other materials are right now, it's clear that there has to be an adjustment, because if you also track consumer companies as well, they've struggled to raise prices because of affordability. Disposable income is being diminished materially, and so you're seeing that overall in the economy. I think that's also why we've seen the economic recovery being so sluggish as well, more because with the consumers are pressed, manufacturing companies can't really expand because there's a view that affordability is still a challenge.
All right. Thank you very much for that. We've got just about a couple of minutes left. Let's see if I can take some of your comments that are coming through. Thank you for sending them in. Dakwa says the Nigerian stock market will still go lower because the results coming out from the companies are not helping matters. Probably buy before election, he says. While this one in from Gwenga Kamu says, is it possible to move people out of poverty by distributing small money to them like the government is doing? Is it not better to create conditions for industry and initiative to thrive, thereby improving the lot of the majority? I guess talking about a lot of these social investment programs, the conditional transfer scheme. I mean, what sort of impact do you think is that? What are your thoughts on that?
No, so I think I agree that the right conditions is critical. So if you think about, I think if there's adequate infrastructure, if companies are able to manufacture locally and not set up companies offshore, there'll be more jobs. So I do agree with with Benga that it clearly makes more sense to focus more on creating the right
Conditions,
conditions.
yes,
And, yeah, so
yes.
it's almost a case of teach a guy to fish and not
Just handing him half a
handing him
fish.
yeah.
We've got Tolu from Lagos as we round up saying, listen, the government is not helping. So I carry my wahala and go hustle offshore. Then I should come and pay tax on the proceeds to the government that has done nothing for me. So it's okay,
So
it's
we
okay,
share
calm
your
down
pain.
now. And Yinka says, here we go again. Dangote, bros. What if he decides not to sell to us? We can't hold him back not to do so as long as he pays his tax. What if Dangote wasn't a Nigerian? So the federal government cannot be creative enough to understand how to make us self-sufficient petrol-wise. Okay, Yinka, sorry about that. A lot of vex there. But thank you very much, Muyiwa from Stanbic IBTC. Thank you very much for coming in this morning. We appreciate having you on the show. And Lagos, do keep listening, because coming up next we have some great music for you. Smokestack, Johnny Griffin lined up there, bit of jazz and a lot more. And then at 7:30 we go into detailed newspaper analysis on the headline stories. It's freshly pressed.